Salami, cheese, pickles in a barrel. Hello, my name is Will and you're listening to Exploding Helicopter, the only podcast in the world trying to expose the truth about helicopter explosions in film. Now, the 1970s were a golden era for conspiracy thrillers. Films like Executive Action, 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View, All the President's Men, or Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation all seemed aimed at a newly cynical and questioning public. Looking back, it's tempting to see this clutch of films as a reflection of the times. The Kennedy assassinations continued to cast a long shadow over that decade, and the Watergate scandal and the Pentagon paper revelations in the early 1970s caused the American public to ask profound questions about who and how their country was being run. So on this show, we're looking at another film that was part of the 70s paranoia cycle, 1977's The Domino Principle. To help me review the film, my guest is a fully paid-up member of the tinfoil hat-wearing brigade. They're definitely out to get him. It's Todd Liebenow from the Forgotten Filmcast. Welcome back to the show, Todd.
Thank you. It's always great to be on the show. I love exploding helicopter. I love talking about films that have exploding helicopters. So I'm glad to be back.
I'm glad to have you back, but I hope that you made sure that you weren't followed, that you kind of changed taxi a couple of times, and that you're dialing into this podcast from a payphone.
I am stashed away in my underground bunker, which means my basement, which is where I always do podcast recordings. So.
Excellent. Well, as I've already sort of alluded to, this is a 1970s conspiracy thriller that we're tackling. And, we were both guests on a Lambcast episode a while back talking about the film JFK. So I've got a bit of a suspicion that you're a bit of a fan of conspiracy thrillers. So, I just wondered what you made of that genre and if you've got any particular favourites there.
Yeah, I do enjoy the genre. Sometimes it's the type of thing where I roll my eyes a little bit at them and go, well, how could anyone ever believe this was actually a thing, type of thing. And I admit with JFK is a film I do really enjoy. I think I probably rank it as Oliver Stone's best for me, just in terms of the style of the film. I admit when I watch it now, I go, man, I most of this is a lie from front to back. I can't understand how I was duped by some of it back when I first saw it in the 90s. But I still think it's an interesting film. But if I got to go for a favorite of the genre, especially in the 70s, you got to go with another Gene Hackman film here, The Conversation. I mean, what a wonderful movie that is. Just sucked me in, and I just it was one that it was on my list of films that I hadn't seen that I should have seen long before I finally watched it. I think I watched it on a flight. I was on a trip somewhere. I downloaded and watched it, and I just was totally engrossed. And it's a case where you're like landing the plane and the movie's not done yet. And you're going, wait, I just need to sit here and finish this movie because it's so wonderful.
Yeah, it's one of those movies that first came on my radar about 25 years ago, and it's an interesting film because I think it's one whose stock has risen over the years. I think that some of Coppola's other films, the Godfather films, Apocalypse Now, have for a long time, I think they grabbed the attention of people in terms of Coppola's CV. But it's been really interesting to see over the years how the awareness and the stock of The Conversation has risen over the last couple of decades.
Well, yeah, it's understandable how The Conversation would kind of be, stuck in the shadow of those other films, because those are such well-known films and have such a pedigree to them, and they just are, so impressive on the surface. Whereas The Conversation is, quite understated and mysterious, and it's one that just kind of floats in there, and you go, wait a second, this is Coppola. Oh, wait a second, it's got Gene Hackman. Oh, this is a film that I would. Probably, as much respect as I have for those other films that you mentioned, I'd probably go to The Conversation before I go to The Godfather or Apocalypse Now.
Well, it's interesting that you're such a fan of that film because obviously The Conversation starred Gene Hackman, and Gene Hackman turns up in the film that we're going to be talking about today. So perhaps we can have a little bit of a comparison between those two Hackman conspiracy thrillers.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I think let's get stuck into The Domino Principle. So let's see if Trailer Man can give us a quick thumbnail sketch of the film's main character.
Subject, Roy Tucker. convicted of first-degree murder. Impulses are obsessive, hostile, antisocial, temperament unstable, capable of erratic, violent behavior. Considered highly dangerous. They think he's perfect.
I represent a group of people who might be able to help you.
The Domino Principle is about to begin.
Get me out of maximum security.
All right.
My cellmate's Bavena, get him out too.
All right.
They're never anything you can identify. They're just they. Most of all, they manage things like money, people. Don't look at me like that. Don't look at me like I'm some kind of a bug, you or anybody else.
The Domino Principle is in motion.
Smile. There's $200,000 in your name. We're pulling you out of here tomorrow. That should tell you something.
The Domino Principle can never be stopped.
Roy Tucker is serving time for the murder of his wife's first husband. In prison, he's approached by a man working for a mysterious organisation who makes him an offer. In exchange for helping him escape and start a new life, Tucker must carry out an unspecified job. After some deliberation, Tucker reluctantly decides to go along with the plan. After his escape, he learns that he is expected to carry out an assassination and refuses. The organisation retaliates by kidnapping his wife. Forced by this turn of events, Tucker participates in the hit, but after the job, he finds out that the promise of a new life will hollow and that the mysterious organisation has no intention of releasing him from their clutches. We've got an excellent cast in this film. Tucker is played by the great Gene Hackman, and there's heavyweight support from Richard Widmark, Eli Wallach and Mickey Rooney. We've also got pedigree behind the camera. The Domino Principle was one of the last films directed by Stanley Kramer. He was best known for the issues pictures like The Defiant Ones, Judgment at Nuremberg and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. While those films are very well regarded, this one only has a 5.7 user rating on IMDb. But let's find out what my guest thinks. So, Todd, what did you make of The Domino Principle?
Well, yeah, this is a film, I don't know. I think it led me down a certain path and then kind of changed things on me a bit here. Because, I mean, when you approached me about possibly doing this film, my first response was, oh, it's one that I had on my list as potentials for my podcast, the Forgotten Filmcast, because it's something that I saw and that looked like it had an interesting premise. It had Gene Hackman, like you said, it had some behind-the-scenes pedigree, and nobody talks about this film anymore. So I thought, oh, that's a great candidate. But since you suggested it first and it's got an exploding helicopter, we're talking about it on yours. And when I sat down to watch this film, it starts with this bombastic opening that just really grabbed me. You've got, about 3-4 minutes of this whole intro that uses black and white stock footage and images just flashing every couple of seconds. And this narrator that's saying, did you really decide to come to this theater tonight? Are you in control of your life? And setting up this whole premise. And then it has this strange opening credit sequence where we've got, dominoes being stacked on pictures of Gene Hackman as a kid, pictures of Gene Hackman as a 20-year-old, whatever. And then we go into this movie that then just meanders, especially for about the first 70 minutes of this movie. I mean, when you said that it has to do with Gene Hackman being, brought in by this organization to carry out some unspecified task. Yeah. We don't even know what it is for 70 minutes of this movie. And I thought, for a movie that starts so strongly setting you up with this mysterious premise and there's going to be this mysterious organization and such, I found much of this film to be pretty boring. I hate to say it.
Well, Todd, you're not going to find a lot of argument from me because, like you say, when I stumbled across this film, I was really excited. I looked at the cast. I thought, man, these are actors I really like. Stanley Kramer, he's made some great movies. And this is, this sounds like a really interesting conspiracy thriller made in the decade that popularized that particular genre. I mean, I just thought, even if this is a bit below average, this is still going to be a really enjoyable watch. But after I sat down and watched this thing, this is one of the most frustrating films I can remember watching in some time. And I finished watching it, and I was just sort of my jaw was agape, and I was just like, what was that? What was that? It is just. I think we'll get into the details of the sort of the plot and stuff, but it just seems overly ambitious, and it just seems like something that might have been a good idea on paper and a good idea in a sort of pitch session, but actually in terms of when they sort of flesh it out and make it into a movie, it is just all of the problems that really should have been anticipated really just come home to roost. And as you say, this film just meanders along, and it's not a good film.
Well, and I wondered, trying to look at some of the trivia, some of the background on this film, if it was a case where this film was sold before it was really tested as to whether it would work. Because my understanding is it's based on a book by a guy named Adam Kennedy, who I guess had been an actor in movies and then went on to, he wrote a few screenplays, but this is, I think, the only movie that's actually based on a novel that he wrote, and then he adapted his own screenplay. And it was sold, I guess, just a matter of months after the book was even published. And, based on the movie, I'm going, is the book that hot? Because it doesn't feel like it here. But yeah, all these guys just seem to be collecting a paycheck here. I think Gene Hackman even admitted that he took this gig because of the paycheck, and I think even turned down roles in things like Jaws and Close Encounters and some movies that are pretty well known to be in this just because he was going to get a few more bucks about it. I mean, Gene Hackman's one of my favorite actors of all time, but Gene, you kind of made a mistake on that one.
He certainly did. And I think we probably need to sort of talk about the plot of this film. Most conspiracy thrillers usually have an identifiable villain, whether it's a single villain or a big corporation or a group of cynical individuals. And I guess what probably excited the people involved in this project was that the Domino Principle was, in some ways, it was going to be the ultimate conspiracy thriller, because unlike some of the other films that we've already mentioned that fit into that genre, in this conspiracy thriller, you never find out who or what is going on with this conspiracy. And I guess on some level, that is quite an exciting premise, because you think, wow, talk about going to the next level. But unfortunately, what that just means is that you have no investment with what you're watching on the screen, or certainly that was my experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, once I reached a certain point in this movie, I kind of had to have a moment of pause and go, wait, have they told us yet what Gene Hackman is doing? No, I don't think they have. And, every couple of moments then I'm going, they still haven't told us. I don't know who these guys in the suits are, or what's their motivation? What's going on here? And even then, when we get to the point where they expose Gene Hackman to what they're going to have him do, it's an odd sequence where they go out in the helicopter, throw a bunch of paint cans in the water, have him practice some sharpshooting, and then we cut away from that and they're landing and Gene Hackman says, I won't do it. And we go, wait, what are you not going to do? We haven't been told what this is yet. And then even when we get to that, are we even told? Obviously, I think we've said already it's an assassination plot. But when we get to the moment of that event happening, are we even told who it is that he was assassinating?
No, we're not told at all. You assume that this is a person of significant importance because they are they live in a very nicely appointed home, and a whole bunch of heavily armed security guards come running out of the property after the hit takes place. So you can assume that this is somebody of great importance, but we never find out who that is. You don't know whether it's just could be an important businessman, whether it's a politician, or, it could even be the president, but there's just absolutely no details as to who this person is that these mysterious people want dead. There's no information as to why this person needs to be killed. There's no information as to what will happen if this succeeds or what will happen if this fails, and there's just no information at all, and it just makes it impossible to have like any sort of investment in this particular film, because the objectives are so unclear. So you just think, well, why does any of this matter?
Yeah, well, and you're also left in the dark as to why Hackman is the guy for the job.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's just this random guy in prison there because of, a murder that involved his wife and her ex-husband and all, and we're never really given too terribly much details on that either. And for some reason, Eli Wallach and the guy with the weird glasses decide that that he's the man for the job. I'm going, that's just like picking some random. I mean, that's almost no better than if they had picked me for the job. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, it just makes no sense, because you just think, well, why do they have to go through this elaborate charade of, because the first 40 minutes of this film is a kind of courtship that takes place in prison when these you see these mysterious guys having a series of meetings with Gene Hackman where they say that they've got the power to get him out of prison, they've got the power to reunite him with his wife, set him up for life. And Gene Hackman's like, well, he's not necessarily because he's not told anything about, well, what's he getting into? He's not necessarily jumping at the prospect of getting into bed with these people. So this sort of courtship takes place over 40 minutes. And during that period, we never find out why Gene Hackman is the person that has to do this particular job. It's not like nobody mentions that he's the best rifle shot in the whole of America, so he's they've got to have him because he's the best ever marksman, or there's nothing. We never learn anything about his backstory which gives you any idea as to why he is the right man for these conspirators. And that mystery, it just adds to this general sort of confusion, and at the end of this film, this sort of anger and annoyance you have with this movie, and you just think, what? Please, give me. I mean, I hate films that explain everything, but this film explains nothing, and it's really, really irritating.
There's brief mention that Hackman was in the military, that he was in Vietnam, but we don't know what he did. We don't know why that's so important to things. I mean, to be honest, all throughout this film, there are little things peppered here and there that you go, now, if you had run with that, you'd had a better movie. In that opening 40 minutes, we spend a lot of time in prison. We kind of go back and forth between Hackman meeting with these shady characters and then just Hackman's life in the cell block. And a lot of that is with his cellmate, who's played by Mickey Rooney. And I'm going, and I should add, foul-mouthed Mickey Rooney, which if you've never seen that before, that's a weird treat. But I would have much rather have had something that focused more on, being like a prison drama with Hackman and Rooney, they're, as these two strangely, put together characters, one guy's an older guy, one's a younger guy. I think that could have been a great film. I've seen Mickey Rooney in other prison films, and I just kind of associated him with that. I was like, oh, Mickey Rooney's in prison again. Okay, great. He's with Hackman. This has promise. But no, that goes nowhere.
I mean, I'm not a screenwriter, but there could have been some changes here, which, I kind of feel that beginning part of the film, it needed some, it's never really clear why Gene Hackman ultimately decides to go along with this conspiracy. It feels if they'd introduced some sort of ticking clock element there where, I don't know, maybe Mickey Rooney, as his cellmate says, I've got to get out of here because I've got to see my dying daughter or something,
right.
some sort of time pressure element which kind of cranks up the pressure on Gene Hackman to make a decision and go along with this. But no, the film doesn't do any of that, and it just deflates the whole proposition and the whole premise.
Can we talk about the villains here for a moment? I mean, we've already mentioned we've got a really good cast of people here who have a heck of a lot more potential than what they do here. I mean, like I said, when I saw Eli Wallach was in this, I saw his name pop up in the opening credits. I was like, okay. And then we established that he's one of these shady characters. I was like, great. But I mean, has Eli Wallach ever been more wasted than what he is here? I mean, he can be so sinister in stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And here, just any opportunity for that, he just draws a gun on Hackman and says, move it, buddy. And it's like, what? Come on.
Well, Eli Wallach is one of those actors. He just always looks like he's up to no good. And, here he is playing a villain behind what we're led to believe is some sort of massive conspiracy. So you're kind of rubbing your hands together, you're licking your lips, and you're thinking, okay, we're going to get some juicy Eli Wallach here. But no, I mean, they could have had anyone playing this particular role. I mean, I don't even know how many lines he really gets in this film. I mean, he can't have much more than a page of dialogue in the whole thing.
Well, and that's the thing. They have, kind of three different figures who are all kind of there as our main villains. And you never really get a sense that any one of them is the one really in charge. Maybe that shortchanges the whole thing because you really want to hang on to one villain in particular who's the slime ball. Eli Wallach is there, and like I said, kind of wasted. You've got Richard Widmark, and again, you're going, you could have done so much more with this guy. I think the one villain that did kind of resonate for me was the one played by Edward Albert. He's kind of this younger guy and comes across as kind of this sniveling slime ball type of a thing. And I got to admit, a lot different than what I'm used to seeing him. Again, don't mean to keep mentioning my podcast, but on a recent episode of my show, we talked about the film Butterflies Are Free, which he appeared, I think it was one of his first movies he was in with Goldie Hawn. He plays this young blind man who's trying to set up out on his own, and he develops this, romantic interest in Goldie Hawn, and it's a very sweet performance. And here he just comes across as this sniveling slime ball. But again, because he's sharing, they have to divide up the villain responsibilities between him and Wallach and Widmark. He doesn't really get a chance to shine. But if I was going to hang my hat on any one of these villains, it was him.
Yeah, I would agree. He definitely comes across as the strongest character of the three. And I agree with the point that you make. There's just simply too many of them. I think probably you could just lose Eli Wallach. I mean, the film doesn't really know what to do with him, and I think if you axe him, then you've got a potentially interesting dynamic between Edward Albert and Richard Widmark. Richard Widmark is the I guess he's the sort of the senior partner in the sort of mysterious conspiracy guys, and he's an actor that I personally really like. He's got this wonderful sardonic delivery to his lines, and he employs some of that in the part that he plays here as this very sort of cynical, and also kind of weary man who he's kind of in charge of the conspiracy, but equally it's very clear that he's also following orders, and he's just a functionary as well. And then, as you say, you've got Edward Albert as this younger, cocky, more arrogant character, and you could have an interesting dynamic between those two and Gene Hackman. But Eli Wallach, he's a bit of a spare wheel here, and it just sort of clogs up a film that really doesn't need any more clogging up than it's already got.
Well, yeah. And, I mean, speaking of things that clog up this film, the top thing I would put on that list would be Candice Bergen.
Oh, yeah.
I got to admit, I'm not a fan of Candice Bergen. I mean, she plays Hackman's wife. And, again, talking about how this film meanders, we spend the first part of this film in prison and setting things up, and then they let Hackman out and they reunite him with his wife. And then we spend a good 15-minute or so chunk of this movie where it suddenly turns into this romance, where it's Hackman and Bergen in love on the beach, and you're going
driving along, singing in a car. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to watch.
And Bergen, I mean, don't get me wrong. Even though I'm not a fan, I admit she's a good actress. She can do some good things, even if I'm not a fan. But her performance here is cartoonish. I mean, in the first moment where she's reunited with Hackman and the waterworks come, it is just not a good performance.
And I think that whole aspect that you're talking about here, the kind of the romance with Candice Bergen, it speaks to a massive problem this film has with pacing. And we've already said it, we spend far too long at the beginning of this film setting up the conspiracy. We're sort of 70 minutes into it before we even get to the assassination or even really get to address what Gene Hackman is going to be doing for these guys. And even then, we kind of the assassination is carried out, and then even then, the film still, when it should be sort of cranking up into top gear, it still manages to find time to have a little sort of a further baggy interlude with Gene Hackman's wife.
Well, and then as we move to the ending too, I mean, things just turn more and more ridiculous. It seems like they're just trying to stack, shock moment onto shock moment to try and give that impression like they were setting up in the beginning of the film, like nobody's in control and you're not in control of your destiny and all this stuff. And, as it gets to the end, I was just confused. I didn't know what was going on anymore. There's some characters we see come back into things. I don't know how much we want to spoil on this, but, there's some characters that come back that you go, wait, that makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and there are some revelations, as you say. We learned that actually, these conspirators have actually been apparently manipulating Gene Hackman for the last 15, 20 years. And that isn't justified. It makes no sense. It adds nothing to the film apart from, well, the only thing it adds is incredulity in the mind of in the mind of the viewer.
Yeah. Well, and especially the ending shot of the film, which again, I don't know how much you want to give away on that, but the ending shot of the movie made me go, so what you're telling me is everything I just saw for the last, hour and 45 minutes doesn't matter at all. I just wasted an hour and 45 minutes because with those final stinger on the movie, you're basically wiping it all away.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if this film, I did a bit of research into this film because it just makes so little sense, and some of the stuff especially some of the stuff at the beginning of the film. I don't know what you thought, Todd, but it seemed quite choppy. There was quite a lot of sort of cutting between scenes where clearly time had passed between the scenes, but it's never really made that apparent. And I've seen a couple of references to this having been a longer film and then cut down, but I can't see that in any place that I would consider reliable. But there does seem to me to be some evidence of tinkering with this movie. As I say, some of the editing and the editing together of sequences at the beginning of this film feels a bit choppy. Suddenly, at the very end of the film, we get a voiceover from Gene Hackman, which at no other point in the film has there been any voiceover. And right. I wonder if that was just added because they needed to sort of try and tie some of the loose strings that existed in this film. And you spoke about the very impactful intro that precedes the title sequence of this film, and again, that felt to me like it had possibly been done, they'd made the film and then somebody thought, we really need something at the beginning of this film to sort of establish what the hell people are going to be watching. I mean, that was my impressions. I don't know if you had a similar sort of feeling.
That went through my mind as well, especially with that opening sequence, because, I mean, if you break it all down, like we said, it's got that opening 3 minutes or so, which is all the archival stuff, fast pace, all that. The opening credits is this strange thing. I mean, it's, it's very artsy fartsy, with the images of Hackman and the dominoes. And there's this song that plays that just does not fit the tone of what we've just watched with that whole archival footage thing. And then it goes into the story itself where we've got Hackman behind bars, and it's very slow paced and such. So yeah, to have that bombastic opening of things, you got to wonder if that came after like test screenings or something where people, already half asleep 5 minutes into the film, because, like we've already said several times, if you just go from the opening credits of the film on, that film just crawls along and meanders for that first 70 minutes before Hackman starts shooting at paint cans.
Well, we are both, I think, Gene Hackman fans. What did you make of his performance in this film?
I think there's always merit to what Hackman brings. I don't think I would ever say that Hackman is phoning it in, even with some of the stuff that just is not, top of his game. I mean, we could talk about, where things went lately. I mean, I think famously his last film was Welcome to Mooseport, 15 years ago. Can you believe we haven't had a Hackman film for 15 years? I mean, the guy retired and he's gone away and I miss him. But at any rate, 70s Hackman, I mean, we're in prime territory here. We're right within a few years of French Connection and Night Moves and The Conversation and all kinds of interesting stuff here. And this movie's kind of plopped in the middle of all that. And I'm not going to say it's a bad performance, but it's certainly not prime Hackman. Hackman does what he can with the material, but it's also one of those things where you watch it the whole time and you go, I don't have a clue what's going on here. I wonder if he did. I think he's just trying to do the best that he can with what's going on, going, guys, I don't know what's going on, but hey, I'm going to give you what you got on the page. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm with you, Todd. I mean, I don't think this is far from the best Gene Hackman performance. I mean, he's still really watchable, even in a film as vanilla or as poor, frankly, as this. And, what I did get from this film was, I mean, I can watch Gene Hackman acting in a scene with Richard Widmark all day. I mean, yeah. Two great actors. I'm happy to see them chew the fat with each other. Probably the most interesting aspect of Gene Hackman's performance is probably the moustache that he's rocking in this film. It's a great tash that he's got.
Oh
here.
yeah. He had a few films in the 70s with that mustache. I think Night Moves was another one of them. But yeah, I mean, he's got a few good moments in this movie. I mean, like you said, you put him with other great actors, with Richard Widmark. You got good stuff. I enjoyed some of his exchanges with Mickey Rooney when they're just yes. in their cell, and they're talking about the delicatessen and things like that. I really enjoy the scene that comes late in the film where, Hackman breaks the bottle and has it at Edward Albert's throat. I thought that was a nice moment. That's Hackman doing his thing. But yeah, I mean, you put it all together and it's a decent performance, but in the interest of a confusing mess of a movie.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at the exploding helicopter action.
He brings the popcorn. She brings the roses. Subject Cinema, a tasty new film topic each week with a side order of film reviews.
Yum.
T.C. Kirkham.
But I'm Jane.
Kim Brown.
What?
Over 500,000 listeners, and you could be the next one. SubjectCinema.com. Real movies for real people.
We're back, and now we're looking at the exploding helicopter action. This occurs about 2/3 of the way through the film. Gene Hackman and the other conspirators use a helicopter to carry out an assassination. As they make their getaway, the helicopter is damaged by gunfire. Forced to land and wanting to cover their tracks, one of the villainous henchmen throws a briefcase inside the whirlybird. Inside it are some explosives, and as the men run away from the chopper, the parked copter explodes in a plume of wreckage and flame. Todd, what did you make of the exploding helicopter action here?
It's all right. I mean, I was glad that there ended up being more to the explosion than I thought there was going to be, because being that we were watching this film for your podcast, I knew that the helicopter was going to explode at some point. And so when they're carrying out the assassination and there's return fire and you get some then flames coming out of the tail of the helicopter and all that and it starts spinning around, I went, oh, okay, here we go. And then the helicopter lands safely. And I was like, okay, so was it just that the tail exploded? Was that it? But then they throw in the briefcase and the thing blows up. And it's a decent enough explosion. I guess what bugged me was that it was just, all right, the helicopter landed safely and then it blows up. I would have much rather had like a midair explosion or, a fiery crash. I guess having it land safely kind of ruined it a little bit for me there. It was a little impressive, though, that it explodes so close to the actors. The actors are still making their way through the water to escape from it, and they're only a good, I'd say 30 feet away from the helicopter or so when it explodes. And I thought, I mean, not to sound callous here, but, after Twilight Zone, you wouldn't have seen that type of thing for sure. This is definitely before that sad incident happened. But yeah, it was surprising at how they do this, rather big explosion with the rotors still turning and all that, with the actors not terribly far away from the action.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed as well, and I was, taken aback by, quite how close they were to the explosion. Because, there's no sort of editing cheating going on. They're quite clearly really close to that, whatever it is that they're exploding, whether it's an actual helicopter or something that they've dummied up to look like the Huey helicopter which they are escaping from. I was intrigued by the method of destruction, that they do use this, satchel or briefcase of explosives, which shows remarkable forward planning, I guess, on the part of these conspirators to have brought that along with them. And it did also seem a bit like a waste of a very good leather bag, really. By I don't know why they couldn't have just taken the bomb out, put it in the helicopter, and kept the bag with them. But no, they prime whatever device it is, chuck the whole thing in, and skedaddle.
Well, and especially when you consider that just a few moments later, I think less than a minute later, they also blow up one of the escaped cars, because they get out of the helicopter into a car, drive a little bit, and then they get out of that car and into something different and blow that up. And you say they wasted a nice bag there on the helicopter. Yeah, they put the explosive in the helicopter in a briefcase or something like that. But when they blow up the car, it looked to me like they just had something wrapped in like a sheet and they toss it in the back of the car. I'm like, oh, I guess you go with, higher quality stuff when it comes to blowing up a helicopter. But if you're just blowing up a Buick, it doesn't matter.
Well, I think on this podcast we approve of higher standards being employed when it comes to blowing up a helicopter. I think that's only fair. I think that's right, and I personally am happy to see that happen on screen. Okay, I think that just about wraps things up for this show. Todd, thanks for joining me once again. Do you want to take a moment to let people know about your own podcasting and film blogging projects?
Absolutely. So you can find my stuff over at forgottenfilmcast.wordpress.com. That's my blog, which is called Forgotten Films. We talk all about the movies that time forgot over there. So the stuff that people don't think about anymore. We don't talk about the new releases. We don't talk about classics. It's just all about stuff that is kind of fallen off the radar a bit. So, and over there you'll find links to my podcast, which is called the Forgotten Filmcast. Recent episodes of that include films like The Molly Maguires, starring Sean Connery, The Last Run with George C. Scott. Most recent episode is about Night Riders, the George A. Romero non-zombie film where they ride around on motorcycles and joust with each other. Please tune into the podcast, and you can follow me on Twitter at Forgotten Films. That's Films with a Z.
And as always, don't forget to check out the Exploding Helicopter website. We've recently posted a new review up there. It's all about the 1980 time travel spectacular, The Final Countdown. So head over to explodinghelicopter.com and check that out. If you could rate or review our podcast, that would be really appreciated. It really helps us spread the word about what we do. But we'll be back soon. But until then, keep watching the skies for those exploding helicopters.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Hey, did I ever tell you about my old man's delicatessen?
You never stopped telling me about your old man's delicatessen.
I can smell it now.
That's your socks.
20 kinds of salami. 30 kinds of cheese. peppers. Peppers hanging on a string.
Pickles in a barrel.
Did I ever tell you about my wife?